So I'm going to call this special meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. I don't, well, famous last words, I don't anticipate this being a long meeting. I think we are convening here for 2 votes today. But before we do that, let's begin, as we begin all meetings, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the
of the United States of America
and to
and
the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and
justice
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you. I have no public comment at this time, but for those who wish to submit public comment for the LAE June regular meeting, those can be submitted via email to info@lawrenceallianceforeducation.org. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent and the mayor for a school closure and COVID-19 response update.
Thank you. We don't have much to update you all since our last meeting. I do want you to know that we continue to meet with all different stakeholders and that we are assembling 2 teams for reopening. One is the task force that is going to be working on the operational sides of what school opening will look like for us in Lawrence. And that is going to be with the guidance that DESE releases. And the other team is a social, emotional, and self-care team. That team is going to meet later this week to start thinking about what is the emotional support that students, staff, families, and the community is going to need. What is the self-care that they're going to need? And that team in part has already been assembled. It is the district-wide climate, school culture and climate. You know them because they did the work with the new code of conduct and student rights. And then we've added additional stakeholder groups to make sure that it's a diverse and inclusive group. Those are my updates for now.
Thank you, Superintendent. Mayor?
My update also will be brief. I just want to let folks know where we're at today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
As of yesterday, 2,846 residents are confirmed positive with COVID-19 in Lawrence. And the sad number of 114 souls lost to this crazy virus as of last night. We are attacking this like every other community. We're doing the social distancing, mandatory masks, $300 fine. We actually do have patrol out there going after people who don't want to wear their masks. But, it's all of those things combined, encouraging people who are sick to stay home. But the last part of that was going to be the idea of, can we get enough tests so that we can get through the community? We have about 90,000 people live in the community. And started on Friday, we are doing 1,000 tests a day. I'll say that again because we're getting a lot of ambient noise from my children. That's 1,000 tests a day starting on Friday. And hopefully we can get through the whole community before the end of the year, considering that, almost 7,000 people already were tested. We have a lot of this stuff paid for by reimbursed by insurance, but there's a gap. So the city itself had to spend $1 million on this, on the testing. So if you feel like you have the virus or you've come in contact with somebody who has the virus, you should call the hotline, and I'll give the hotline later on again, and get tested. If you're a City of Lawrence resident and you have been in contact with somebody who has the virus, or you feel like you have the virus or symptoms, you should be having no problem getting tested. You do have to get a doctor's note. Just let them know that you are a Lawrence citizen and you need to get that squared away. Anyhow, so we're doing a menu of things to attack this so that it allows for the phase 1 of opening in Massachusetts, so that people know they have to wear their masks and take into consideration that some businesses will get back to work. We are putting together a plan for City Hall that might coincide with what's going on in Boston. So for now, I think the important part is that we still are in the heart of this epidemic, at least in Lawrence, and communities like Lawrence. But the testing 1,000 a person a day is going to be very important, because you test, you get positive, you stay home. When you stay home, every person that we get to stay home who has this disease is just one less carrier. But there's a lot of people out there that don't know they have it, and so they're not staying home.
Can I ask, I know this is just a report, Mayor, but what happens with an employee that is working, tests positive, has to stay home for 14 days, right? What happens after that? How is that person, how can you determine that the person is well enough to come back to work?
Listen, we are in a kind of that puts us in a real jam, because we can't ask them to get a note from their doctor to say that they're better. But the guideline is 14 days after, they show symptoms. And so once they get tested positive and they don't have any symptoms, they can sit out for 14 days. And if they feel well enough, they should come back to work. If they don't feel well, they shouldn't come back to work. And so that's what happens with an asymptomatic person. So, let's say I have it and I give it, and my wife comes in contact with me, she can tell her doctor, hey, I think my husband has it. I think I may have it. Can I get tested? She doesn't show any symptoms. She gets tested, bam, she has it. She's asymptomatic. She should stay home for 14 days. And if she still, after the 14 days, feels fine, she can go to work. But just remember, we're all doing this, she can go back into the population, I should say. And as long as she's wearing her mask and washing her hands and keeping 6 feet, that's where the last piece of the puzzle is, the testing. That way she knows she had it, and she knows she's got to keep herself protecting from, she got to protect herself from other people. The legal piece about, can you force somebody back to work? Can you force them not to stay out? You can't. If they have COVID-19, they have to self-quarantine, and the doctor will make them do that. But you can't ask them for a note when they come back. They just, 14 days after being notified they had it, they have no symptoms, they can come back into the population.
Yeah, and I know I'm kind of taking up the time here because this is more of a report, but the biggest fear in that regards is that the other employees, how are they going to react once they know that someone is coming back that has already been diagnosed? And I know it's out of your hands and it's out of all of us. I think we're all asking the same questions, but I just figured I'd ask.
So that's why the Department of Public Health at the state level has made us not tell people who has it. And so, somebody that disappears off the job, it's not always going to be they left because of that. And I know rumors getting around. People will know that some people had it. They might tell them themselves that they had it. But, if they follow the guidelines, stay out 14 days and come back with no symptoms after 14 days, then at least that's the relief. We can't keep them away from the buildings or from work as long as they've done that the time in quarantine. And we can't ask. Specifically, DPH is saying you cannot ask for a letter that you're better. And just as a side note, this is going to be a bigger problem as we try to figure out personnel policies. You can't keep the people who are most impacted by these away either. So if I'm 65 or older, you got to let me come back to work. Right now, we have not let them come back to work, mostly because they're mostly affected by the most people that are affected are those folks at that age. So once we go to reopening phase 2 or phase 3, you can't keep them away, even that, and people who have underlying symptoms. So it's something we're going to have to figure out with legal.
Right, and it's something that, and I'm just going to make this comment because I know the school department and even the city it will be faced with this, is that at what point, once an employee comes back and infects somebody else, will workers' comp insurance come into play where they have not really, the insurance industry has said, well, there's no coverage for this, but what if one of your employees or my employees makes somebody else sick, this happens in the place of work. So then there is another challenge right there.
And lots of people who wanted to reopen in the first phase and second phase wanted to get, legal dispensation, if you would. And they're like, nope, everybody's got liability. The state, the city, a private industry, everybody's got the liability you got. The only people who actually got let off the hook were not the small real estate companies, because we love the small real estate companies. the large real estate companies who supported restaurants. Like the restaurant has, lost business, and they weren't paying them out. And so those are the only people really. Everybody else still has a liability. So we're gonna have to have a conversation with legal about it.
Yes.
May I ask, John, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Pip.
Mayor, are we testing the employees, taking their temperatures when they come into work? Or the
I'll let
superintendent? I don't
the
know.
superintendents talk about on the school side, but on the city side, fire and police are self-testing before they come to work, and Department of Public Works is staying on the job.
I don't know.
Those are basically the essential people.
Okay. Superintendent, on the school side, we have CAF workers, we have, I believe, custodians. Are we taking their temperatures before they enter the buildings?
We are awaiting DESE guidance in order to be able to answer that question. But I'm happy to come back to you with the guidance and then how we're applying it to the school system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And all this stuff is like a minefield on personnel policy, and you do it wrong and you can get jammed up. We got to the point of testing after long conversations with the firefighters union, long conversations with the police, and long conversations with laborers.
Okay, thank you, everyone. At this time, I'm going to ask the superintendent to move on in her report to student retention and promotion policy. I think everyone will recall we've been briefed on aspects of this in the past two meetings, or in two prior meetings, including our most recent meeting. I have put in the chat a potential draft motion, but I'll turn it over to the superintendent for any comments or perspective she wants to offer before we vote.
Yes, so we met with different stakeholders on this, including parents and staff members, educators, and unanimously they agreed that this was the right thing to do on behalf of students. The other thing that we've been doing is meeting with educators on how do we create additional interventions and supports to support those students who are going to need the additional support throughout the summer and when we return in the fall. So I can assure you that they're working really hard to create those interventions and additional supports to ensure that our students get the necessary skills in order to move into the next grade. We feel this is important. Given this crisis, we consider this an additional layer of trauma. It feels unjust to us, unequitable to retain students that perhaps could have gotten the additional support face-to-face. They have missed now, 4 months of schooling. And so for those reasons, we are asking to suspend the current promotion and retention policy.
Thank you, Superintendent. I want to put the motion on the floor, and then I'll entertain any final questions, comments from anyone. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to temporarily suspend the Lawrence Public Schools promotion and retention policies for the 2019-2020 school year.
So moved.
Second.
The motion is from Member Mariano, seconded from Member Rivera. At this time, I'll go through in alphabetical order to see if there are any questions or comments. Jess Andors is not present. Noemi Kasturi, Laura, any comments or questions at this time?
No comments at this point. Thank you.
Patricia Mariano, any comments or questions at this time?
No, but I just think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Mayor Rivera, any comments or questions at this time?
Yeah, and this is what school districts that look like ours are doing across the Commonwealth.
To date, I only know that Boston Public has done that.
Okay, thank you.
Ventura Rodriguez, any comments or questions?
Yeah, just briefly. First of all, I support, the decision completely. And I think, it's been referenced a few times. There's a return to school working group that's meeting right now across the state, about 40 people, and, sort of hoping to create some guidance. But I think this is an area in particular where just how we assess our students, and I don't mean like, MCAS, but just like, how we think about what they've learned, where they're at, I think is just always critical, but especially now as we think about heading into the summer, heading into the school year, just that notion of assessing where students are at and where they need support will just continue to be critical. And I think this policy suspending this will help with that, work. So I think it is the right thing to do, but just wanted to underscore, and I think the goal here is some guidance will be coming from the state. We think sometime in June. The group is trying to put some recommendations together to send to the commissioner, but in favor of it, so thank you.
Thank you, Ventura. Julio Silverio, any comments or questions?
Just a question. So the suspension is temporary, which includes, I'm assuming, the MCAS testing?
So the policy is specific to promotion and retention, meaning no student will be retained for the remainder of this school year.
Right, which normally has to do with the students, if a student stays back, has to do with them either passing or not passing the MCAS? Or am I?
That may be one factor for students at the high school level, but this policy applies across the levels, including kindergartners. And so they're not, they don't take the MCAS. It's based on many factors, conversations that teachers have with parents, other educators, and principals, and their teams make decisions about retaining a student, but not specific to MCAS.
Okay. This probably could prove to be a useful tool for the future for the high schoolers, for the benefit of the MCAS, for promotions. So just a thought on that. I'm happy to support that.
Thank you, Julia. Joseph Trinidad, any comments or questions?
No, just that I strongly support and agree with the decision.
Thank you. At this time, I will move the vote. Joan, could you call the roll on the vote? A yes vote will support a temporary suspension of the Lawrence Public Schools promotion and retention policies for the 2019-2020 school year. A no vote will oppose the temporary suspension. Joan, could you call the roll?
Yes, I will. First, we'll start with Mayor Rivera,
Yes.
Julia Severio,
Yes.
Jessica Andrews is absent. Patricia Mariano,
Yes.
I'm sorry, take it back. Ventura Rodriguez, I apologize.
Yes.
Patricia Mariano,
Yes.
Naomi Kasturi Laura,
Yes.
and John Conley.
Yes.
So we have 6 yeses, no nos, and 1 absent.
The motion carries 6-0 with 1 member not present, and the policy is temporarily suspended. At this time, we will move on to the report of the chair. This is for the first up here is the proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 Lawrence Public Schools budget. I have circulated a motion in the chat. I want to just be clear, we're going to have a discussion in a second here, but just so everybody understands the intent, I am going to poll the budget subcommittee for a favorable recommendation on this budget, and then we will vote as a full body for that recommendation if the subcommittee gives a favorable recommendation. So it'll be 2 votes. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to the superintendent. You can note in the chat, the proposed amount is $216,084,236. And I turn it over to the superintendent and her team for any last comments on the budget and where this number comes from. Thanks. Superintendent.
Thank you. So I think we had a process that was robust. I want to thank the school leaders and the school-based teams. I want to thank the central office leaders who spent an enormous amount of time building this budget. This budget is driven by our priorities that we all spoke about in the winter. This budget reflects the needs and the work that is currently on the way and the work that we see as necessary. We understand the uncertainty of the Fed, state, and local budget. We are prepared to amend this when we have the impact of that budget. And so we're happy to take your questions with respect to the proposed budget.
So I'll go through for questions. Jess Andrews, again, not present. And I'm going to work in reverse order. Joseph Trinidad, any questions on the budget?
No, sir.
Julio Silverio, any questions on the budget?
So my understanding is this budget does not include the 21 million as
SOA.
SOA. And were we able to cut back the 10% across the board? I know that that was something that you were going to be working on from our last meeting.
Sure, yes, I do remember that, and we spoke about that. This budget does not include a reduction of any sorts. This budget is presented in its entirety as we built it earlier this winter and throughout the spring. And as I mentioned, we are prepared to come back to you to have the additional reduction as soon as we have a number to work with.
So this still includes the $5 million that was taken out of the SOA.
I'm going to let Maciel jump in here to make sure that we have the numbers and that we have answered your question.
Sure. So the 216 million that is part of the motion, it includes the whole 21 million of SOA. So this is the full budget as it stands. So I don't know if that helps you understand a little bit better. Just to kind of differentiate where the two different things come from, the budget as presented by school, department by department, did not include SOA. That total number does include SOA. I hope that helps clarify.
So let me just chime in here, because I think we're missing a sort of elemental piece here. This is the all-in number. We had originally had discussions that this wouldn't be included. When we were doing the review, we were consistently asking without SOA. However, just given the the uncertain state of school funding, the number that we're putting forward today is the all-in number. It includes SOA. It includes the Chapter 70 projection from the governor's budget, which has since been withdrawn. And this is a vote functionally to comply with the Lawrence city law, to make the recommendation from the school department so that the city can then take their whole budget to the city council for review. But I think, and I would ask the mayor to chime in on this as well, that all parties, Lawrence Public Schools, mayor's office, LAE, city council, state delegation, understand that we're going to have to vote at a later time, likely later in the summer, on a revised number once DESE and, most important, the state legislature and governor have chimed in with the real Chapter 70 number and the real SOA number. And so today is effectively a placeholder vote. And I think the decision from LPS was to recommend the number based at the time that the governor's budget came out and the SOA numbers had come out. But we have a understanding here that these numbers will change, but we have no guidance at this time on what those change numbers will be. Mayor, I don't know if you want to chime in on this.
Sure. Our budget that we submitted to the council, which we did on the 15th, is the budget without SOA, based on the governor's number. So they have that in there, plus the difference between the $5 million or so that Member Severio was talking about. My expectation is that there's going to be an education budget that reflects everybody's desire, and this is the same group of people that voted for SOA. So I'm no one can tell the future, but at the very least we know that the same group of people that expanded public education in Massachusetts by hundreds of millions of dollars is not going to now cut education in this worst crazy time. So we're feeling good about the number for Chapter 70, and just like the budget we submitted, our expectation is either the governor will meet his budget numbers, and if he does, we have a budget and we can just keep trucking forward. And if not, then we have to come back and do some cuts. That is better than doing 112 budgets where everybody's on pins and needles every month, and we have to come back and redo this and redo this. This is not a budget based on hope. This is a budget based on facts. And so I think that they're prepared to, they know what they have to do. At least my expectation is that the school department knows what they have to do with or without SOA. It's not in our budget, but it's not, how should I say it? It's not something foreign to have a budget voted on by the school body and then voted differently on by city council. So I'm not worried about it. And tonight I do support the budget because if we get the money, I want to spend it in the way that has been presented. But because I submitted a different one, I have to abstain tonight. But I do support the budget. I know this seems like all crazy and sideways, but this is COVID-19 world.
John, if I may, based on the mayor's explanation and Maciel's explanation, I think when we debated this, going back and forth on the two previous meetings that we had about whether the SOA money should have been included in the budget or not, since there are so many ifs and buts that we need to think about. And I wish, for the sake of this, and I support the budget based on our discussions because we went over that. I wish that the $21 million would not be included, but be listed separately, with the expectations that if we don't get that $21 million, these will be the consequences, especially now that we know that the city is not including the $21 million in their budget. I'll leave it open for any other members that have any other questions, but those are my concerns.
Well, yeah, I'm going to circle back on those two. I share them overall. At this time, I'm going to keep just moving on questions. Ventura Rodriguez, questions or comments?
Sorry. And Mayor, actually, I really appreciate just your perspective and comments here. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this represents for me, like, as the superintendent said, the work that's been done for months with school leaders, with teachers, with, community members, this board. And it reflects, I think, the priorities of how we'd like to spend the money that, we currently are hoping to get or assuming to get from Chapter 70 and SOA. For me, it's a good way of just putting that entire plan forward in its entirety, given the months of conversation, and especially because we've gotten no indication concretely that SOA will not come or that Chapter 70 will be reduced. So for me, I think it's an important vote today to at least put on the record, like, all the work that's happened and what the superintendent and her team are recommending as expenditures to support students in the district. And so I'm prepared to approve it. And then just knowing that, as the mayor also said, like, we're going to have to come back once we get actual information. And it could be that fully funded Chapter 70 and SOA, and if that's the case, the budget's done, you know. And if not, then we'll have to come back and take a look at, you know, those. So, you know, just in favor of approving it, given the work. And again, as John also said, underscoring, we're going to have to come back once we actually get concrete decisions from the governor.
Thanks, Ventura. Mayor Rivera, do you have additional comments or questions?
I do not.
Thanks. Patricia Mariano?
Ventura, I can echo your sentiments exactly. I think we've spent a lot of time on this budget. I think we just have to think positive and hope that everything comes the way we hope it will happen. And this budget will reflect it, and we can start the school year off with everything that we need. So I'm in favor of supporting this budget going all in.
Thanks, Pat. Noemi Kasturi, Laura?
Yes, I feel the same way as Pat, and also, you know, the other comments below. You know, I agree with the budget, with the understanding that, you know, things are very fluid right now. Changes may happen at the state level. I mean, we might have to go back and revisit the budget, and as long as everybody understands that that is at the table, I'm okay with the work that the school district have been doing the last couple of months.
Thank you, Noemi. So I just want to echo some of Julia's comments. So I had assumed up until today that the number we would vote on today would not include SOA. And I started late today because I was doing like last second checks on a number of sort of moving balls around the number we would vote on. And so I do have a concern on that, but I ultimately come to a place where I will vote for this budget, and just let me say why. While I don't anticipate personally that SOA will be funded, at least not this year, we don't actually have any official communication indicating that is the case. And we are still awaiting communication on the Chapter 70 number as well. So at this time, we actually have no clear information about the Chapter 70 number or the SOA number. And so then rather than make assumptions which would limit this budget at this time, I do think it's correct to support an all-in number. And in the event that things work out great and those can be fully funded, then we will have approved it. In the event that that all-in number changes when the state clarifies what will happen with Chapter 70 and SOA, we will come back and vote again. But until we know, I don't want to set any limit on it. I think the best thing we can do is to create as much flexibility as possible. But I want to state at the same time, and I think this is reflected in the actions that Mayor Rivera has taken on the city side, that we do this with a measure recognizing that we will most likely have to come back again once the state has clarified numbers for us. But at this time, I don't want to put, I don't want to presuppose any limits until we have more clarity.
John, excuse me.
Yep.
I do have a, sorry, going backwards, but I do have a question, and it might touch on something that was said before. It may not make sense to go through the whole process of redoing the budget based on cuts that we do not know where, where things would land. But on the other hand, has the school district been thinking about, even back of their heads, what would be plan B in case of SOA money is not approved or Chapter 74? I mean, have there been any talks?
I'll let the district answer that.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thank you so much, Noemi. Absolutely, we have been thinking quite a bit, very sadly, about that scenario, and we are prepared to come back to you all with several scenarios. This is going to have to include conversations. I think I had mentioned this before with our school leaders and their teams, because this budget was built in collaboration.
Mhm.
It's why we need to wait for that number. But absolutely, we have already, thought in our heads different scenarios. All a very sad scenario for us, of course, but we will make it work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
John, if I may?
Please.
I think we are all in agreement that we want, for the sake of time, we want to make sure that this budget is approved, especially because we asked all the questions at the previous meetings, and we know all of the hard work that has gone into it. But I don't want us to go into this with a false sense of having more than what we have. That's one. And number two, based on the presentation on the SOA, there's still an item that is outstanding, and that is the conversation with the other stakeholders, parents and students, which, as you know, is very important to me, that those conversations take place. And the fact that I will vote in favor of approving this budget does not take away the responsibility of the school district to come back to us with that information.
Appreciate that, Julia. And I would just mention as well that we will still at the June meeting vote on the SOA application itself. So I think your reservation here is noted, but also you will still have your vote on that SOA specifically. And if you don't feel the district's in compliance in the June meeting, you will have the opportunity to vote yes or no on the SOA application. The last piece I would just say on this is, because what I did toy around with was, would we reduce the number proposed here by 21 million? I think the issue there is, what if the state comes back and says, you're not going to get the 21, but you are going to be able to get 4 million extra on SOA. And we're going to fund Chapter 70 fully. It's, again, we don't know the number, and so we use a placeholder that assumes the budget that was prepared, and recognize that we will have to come back in once we have more clarity on that number. Any other comments or questions from any member? All right, at this time I would poll the, I'm going to ask Joan to poll the budget subcommittee for a favorable recommendation for the Lawrence Public School budget for school year 2020-2021 in the amount of $216,084,236. Joan, to poll the subcommittee, a yes will be for a favorable recommendation. A no will be for an unfavorable recommendation. Joan, to poll the subcommittee, you need to poll all members except for Jess Anders and Noemi Kasturi Laura.
Thank you for that. Okay. So, Mayor Rivera,
Abstain.
is that a yes?
I abstain.
Oh, abstain, I'm sorry. Okay. Julia Severia,
Yes, with my reservations fully noted.
okay. Dr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Patricia Mariano,
Yes.
and Chair Conley.
Yes.
Okay, so we have out of 5, we have 1 abstain and 4 yeses.
So the budget is favorably recommended by the subcommittee and a vote of 4 in the affirmative and 1 abstention. Chair would now entertain a motion to recommend the Lawrence Public Schools budget for school year 2020-2021 in the amount of $216,084,236.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second?
It is, the motion has been moved by member Mariano, seconded by member Custodia Laura. The motion is on the floor. I will take one last run through for questions or comments and then proceed to the vote. Noemi, any final questions or comments on the budget?
No, not at this point. Thank you.
Patricia Mariano, any final questions or comments?
No, not at this time.
Mayor Rivera, any final questions or comments?
Nope, I'm all set.
Ventura Rodriguez,
Nope, I'm all set. Thanks.
Julio Silverio.
All set, thank you.
I'll just offer my final comments and questions, or I'm sorry, Joseph Trinidad. Any final comments or questions?
The only thing that I want to say from the students' perspective is thank you, because this number is not only money, it also represents, like previously mentioned, the hard work that you all have put in. So thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Joseph. I want to thank the superintendent and her team for all their hard work through this budget process, which was interrupted about halfway through by COVID. I want to thank the members of the budget subcommittee for all of their hard work. And I think the piece that I guess is only seen by LAE junkies who follow all of our meetings. I have yet to meet one, but I just want to note that the budget subcommittee goes through the budget, not just at every department, but every school. And I want to thank them for all of their work in going through this. I want to thank the superintendent and her team for all of their thoughtful work in preparing this. And I want to thank Maciel in particular on her first budget in her role for all of her hard work. So I offer deep thanks to everyone, and I will vote yes. And I say my final comments, not intended in any way to reflect on LPS and the people who put all their hard work in, or the members of BLAE. And I think they have already been better stated by member Silverio, but it is difficult for me to vote on a budget where we know the number won't be right. And so I state clearly that we recognize that after this vote, we will need to reconvene later when we have more information to get the number right. And the side of me that recognizes the oversight role here as requiring elements of fiscal stewardship says to me it should be the most conservative number possible. But ultimately, where I do come down here is that recognizing and stating clearly for the record that we will have to come back into session once we have more information, is that I come down on the side here that is also in an oversight role for the children and families of Lawrence, and that budgets are first and foremost, as we all know, having worked on budgets in different ways, each of us, that budgets are a statement of our values. And not recognizing or not knowing now what the ultimate number will be, but recognizing that we will have to come back in, I would rather vote for a budget that leaves the most options open and states clearly our values, and that those are that we put the children and families of Lawrence first, and that we state all that we want for them possible. And so that is why I ultimately will cast a yes vote for this proposed number. And we'll note with a degree of sadness that it was just a few months ago when we were very hopeful about adding $21 million to a budget and being able to expand, the ability to deliver more opportunity for Lawrence children and families. And through no one's fault, a global catastrophe hits, and we are left in a position where we will vote on this number, which reflects our values and our hopes and aspirations, but recognize that we will need to come back into session when we have a better idea of what the real numbers will be. I'm going to move the vote at this time. Joan, can you call the roll? This is for the entire LAE.
Mayor Rivera,
Abstention.
Julia Severio,
Yes.
Jessica Andors is absent. Ventura Rodriguez,
Yes.
Patricia Mariano,
Yes.
Noemi Kasturi Laura,
Yes.
and John Conley.
Yes.
So we have 5 yeses, 1 abstain with 1 absence.
Thank you, Joan. The motion to recommend the budget passes with 5 in the affirmative, 1 abstention, 1 not present. And I would again thank the members of the LAE for all of their work, and the members of LPS and the superintendent and her whole team for their work to date. And we know we will continue to work on this through such difficult times. But my deepest thanks to everyone for all that they've done through today. Next up on the agenda is the Student Opportunity Act update. I have none. I continue to put this on the agenda the same way we do the COVID response in the event that we get more clarity on the SOA numbers, but I have none at this time. Moving next on the agenda, the minutes of the April 29th meeting. I have to confess, I have not had a chance to review them yet, so I'm going to hold them for the June meeting to approve the minutes then. At this time, I will just run through one last time for any final comments from members before we do a motion to adjourn. Comments on anything, leave it open. So let me just run through at this time. Joseph Trinidad, any final comments today?
No, sir.
Julia Silverio, any final comments?
No, thanks.
Ventura Rodriguez, any final comments?
No, thank you.
Mayor Rivera, any final comments? Mayor, any final comments? I think you're on mute. Any final comments, Mayor? Any final comments, Mayor? Okay, Patricia Mariano.
John, I probably should have mentioned this when the superintendent was giving her report, but I was wondering for our next meeting, if there was any way she could let us know what the remote learning participation rate is, about how many kids in the district, a percentage is, I don't know if that's possible, if there's any way of figuring that out. But I think as we look to September and what school might be like, I think it's important to look at that data as to how many kids actually are working with the remote learning. And also, when I was looking at the retention and promotion policy, I think that policy was written in 2014 or maybe revised at that time. So it's 6 years old, and this might be a good opportunity for us to look at that and maybe, when things settle down, revise that. Just a couple of suggestions.
Thank you, Pat. I don't, Superintendent, do you, would you be able to report on participation, remote participation rates at the next meeting?
I think what we'd like to do is we're going to engage families in the discussion of what has worked in remote learning, what they're learning from our educators and other stakeholders, and any other learnings and any other data that we can provide. The good news, Pat, is that we are going to be assembling a committee to look and review at this policy and also do some learning from this closure and this suspension and moving forward. What are the right interventions and strategies that we can use way ahead of time before implementing a policy such as retention?
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Noemi Kasturi, Laura, any final comments or questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Superintendent, I turn it over to you for final comments or questions today.
My last comment to you all is that we really appreciate your engagement throughout this process of the budget under these incredible circumstances in this pandemic. So on behalf of students and families and staff, we're deeply grateful for all your hard work on this. We have taken your comments to heart, specifically the re-engagement of stakeholders, of families and kids with SOA feedback. So we are prepared to do that when we return in later, either this summer or in the fall, and we'll come back to you with additional feedback and any amendments that that plan requires. So thank you again.
Thanks, Superintendent. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion is from Member Silverio, seconded by Member Mariano. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries at this time. We are adjourned, and we are next scheduled to meet for our regular June meeting on June 10th, Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.